Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about role-playing games. Specifically, today it's Dungeons and Dragons. So for a few of you, you'll probably be aware that I have an issue with Wizards of the Coast. So as a disclaimer, I'm going to say right now, I am not a fan of what Wizards of the Coast does with their books for a variety of good reasons, okay? Some you might consider to be poor reasons, but I think they are good reasons. But I am still going to give as honest and an objective view of this book to you because I know that's what people are looking for. Objectivity is not possible by anybody, but I'm going to try as hard as I possibly can. So Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, this is the review. It is, of course, published by Wizards of the Coast, and it has just recently been released. I will say right now that half the book is a recycled adventure called The Lost Mine of Phandelver from the Dungeons & Dragons starter set, which has been discontinued in terms of its publication or printing. That being said, you can still get The Lost Mine of Phandelver for free digitally if you go to something like D&D Beyond. It still does exist. So it's not the end of the world. The Lost Mine of Phandelver section of the adventure has a lot of new art that has been added. Some of it is pretty good. Some of it's alright. Some of it's average. Some of it's not so great. But vastly, more art's always a good thing usually. The first half of the adventure has very small, medium and large errors that have been fixed for the Lost Mine of Phandelver, but not everything has been fixed. You're still going to notice that there is still little to no information on Gundren Rockseeker, who is in fact the key MacGuffin for the Lost Mine of Phandelver. They haven't changed that. The book includes more maps for the Spiderweb chapter for locations people have requested, such as Old Owl Well, Wyventor, plus the first encounter, Goblin Ambush, has been included as well. These are good things. For those of you who needed maps, you now have them. The layout of the adventure, The Lost Mine of Phandelver, has been improved. It is easier to follow than the original version of The Lost Mine of Phandelver. So, vast improvement. 3 adventure hooks, not just one, has been provided for The Lost Mine of Phandelver. But I would say right now that helping the Gundren character, that quest where you go and help Gundren Rockseeker is still the strongest for the players out of all of the hooks that are provided out of the 3. Some of the combat encounters and monster stat blocks, for the Lost Mine of Phandelver section at least, have been upgraded or certainly made tougher. A large range of background stories are offered for player characters to use, but they aren't very strong in terms of a background story, but they do give you a lot of flexibility, provided that people actually use them. The changes to the races and gender and existing non-player characters that you will find in the Lost Mine of Phandelver are unnecessary in my opinion, but I don't really think it's a big issue, and frankly I don't care. It's not one of those things that I would hang my hat on and say, I can't possibly use this because they've done that. It seems like a small issue to me. The designer has done a very good job of providing what enemies will reveal if they are bribed or interrogated by the player characters as they progress through the story or adventure. They've done a pretty good job. It's certainly much easier to find that information, and you get that information pretty much spelled out as you go at each stage. Now, the second half of the book has a lot of adventure and a lot of tools for a game master. The first chapter being chapter 5, because chapter 1 through to chapter 4 is all Lost Mine of Phandelver. But chapter 5, Path of Peril, has goblin crime plaguing Phandalin, and the players have to try to stop this before they wind up with a town rioting around them. Then you have chapter 6. This is the Shattered Obelisk. It involves the player characters trying to track down fragments of a Netherese obelisk that goblins have been collecting parts for pieces from hidden temples and underground caves. And then you have chapter 7, Rifts in Reality. It has the player characters infiltrating a Mind Flayer enclave to stop a ritual that will turn the Phandalin townsfolk into Mind Flayers, and potentially the entire world. They also have to rescue some kidnapped victims. And then, I would say probably the best chapter out of the entire book, chapter 8, Beyond a lightless star. So Beyond a Lightless Star requires the player characters journey to the far realm. Awesome. And they have to defeat some mind flayers and an elder brain. And they're going to do this in a strange sort of organic stronghold, which really represents the internal organs or body of a human being or a creature, because you will be journeying through something like an enormous brain. But that's not the only thing. So I thought this was quite clever. I almost feel like you could have done more with that. But hey, always fun to do something like that. The new monsters provided in the adventure have some terrifying creatures, including one that is directly copied from Kobold Press. Now I'm going to say right now that Kobold Press has copied from Wizards of the Coast and TSR for many years. So it's nice to see the shoe is changing over. I thought it was amusing. It is certainly an indication that both Wizards of the Coast and Kobold Press have some issues with actually generating their own original stuff without just renaming somebody else's monster. The new magic items are pretty standard for Wizards of the Coast. Conceptually and mechanically, I don't think they're particularly special. They're just there. There is a story tracker. It's fine for a game master who needs to be reminded to take notes. For those of you who do take notes, you won't need this. The connection of the Lost Mine of Phandelver to the second half of the adventure is really tacked on, with a link being it takes place in Phandalin. Well, it's the same place, I suppose that's something we can say. The same town, and also the fact that they both have psychic goblins. But that's really it. Locations are rather dungeon crawly in the new adventure section, with some of the playstyle being pretty much the same. It's not really expanding things. The Lost Mine of Phandelver has a much wider variety of environments to explore compared to the second half, except for the very last chapter when they go to the Far Realm, because that one stands out the most. There is a colour double-sided poster map of Phandalin and the Sword Coast included in the back of the book, which is always nice to see. The horror aspect of the adventure is tame for most adults. I don't think you're going to be terrified by this, but it does include some grotesque body transformation for non-player characters and for your player characters. So you're going to need to check with your players, are they going to be alright with this sort of thing? I can see problems for players being invested in saving the population of Phandalin when facing down a horror theme and mind flayers. There are going to be a few people who won't like this, and others who will just love it. The townsfolk of Phandalin that have been kidnapped really need to, or should be, the non-player characters that the players are going to be rescuing. Whoever they're going to rescue, those kidnapped individuals, you don't want them to be people they don't know. You want them to be individuals within the population of Phandalin that they have got along well with, rather than some new random stranger. And you do have a bit of that going on. You could easily repurpose and chop shop the new maps and locations for your own homebrew campaign if you wanted to, and discard the adventure completely. Really, the only reason to buy this book is the second half of the book, because The Lost Mine of Phandelver is still freely available if you want it. You do not need to pay for it. You can get everything you need digitally, okay, in PDF form. So you don't have to go and buy the starter set, the original starter box set. The full story behind the obelisk is not revealed at the conclusion of this adventure, which is either a boon or a pain. I am suspecting that some players will not like this, and some game masters won't like this either. Clearly, the obelisk is going to be coming up in future adventures that Wizards of the Coast will release, and they're not going to reveal their hand just yet. But let's get real, it's probably Vecna. The book is far too expensive for what you get, considering what a third-party publisher will produce or offer to you, and they have also provided you with half the material as just repeated material that they've done before. So it's not new material, it's just been slightly modified, updated errors, stuff like that. So you're not really getting value for money, not to mention that a Wizards of the Coast book is significantly more expensive than a third-party book, and a third-party book, quite often for the same value or less, will give you 400 pages worth of color artwork and all the sorts of things that you might want. That's the kind of stuff that people produce in the third-party realm. And Wizards of the Coast really doesn't compete with that very well. The adventure is definitely not suitable for young kids or children, and some adults just won't like these horror themes. So be aware of that. Make sure you do a session 0 before you start running this thing, because initially it doesn't seem that hardcore, and then of course you go into the body horror and the transformation side, and that's probably the biggest aspect for people. It's going to be the transformation of their own characters and the NPCs around them. This is really not an introduction to Dungeons & Dragons for a new game master. For those of you who are thinking, well, it's got half of Lost Mine of Phandelver, for a new game master, this is perfect. No, unfortunately it's not, because the advice that was provided in the original Lost Mine of Phandelver pamphlet has been removed, and this adventure is significantly longer than the Lost Mine of Phandelver. It's double the size, and it goes from level 1 to level 8 or 9, roughly, somewhere in there. So I'm hoping that this was all useful to you in some way, and if it was, fantastic. I want to thank my patrons who support me on Patreon. Look after yourself, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.